Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to Inclusive Language event tonight, which is the fourth event of Diversity and Inclusion in Germany event series. And we have 10 events, 10 weeks dedicated to diversity and inclusion. My name is Ola Jonherius. I'm here with you every Tuesday at 5. And I have seen a lot of familiar names here, so I'm really, really excited that people keep coming back and people keep being very committed. So thank you very much for that. Today we have, as mentioned before, the event about inclusive language. I'm not going to be alone. We have amazing speaker today here, Taylor from Babel. Hi, Taylor.
Hi.
So just a little bit of a procedure, how we're going to proceed today. We are going to go, first of all, through the presentation, and then it's going to be more of a panel discussion throughout the event. So you are all currently on mute. I cannot see any of you because the event is going to be recorded. And just to avoid all your beautiful faces to be on the camera, I just put it in such a way that I can't see any of your faces. So just a bit of introduction about myself, what I do, who am I. If you don't know me, I'm a diversity inclusion trainer and consultant. I teach, I consult, I educate. I'm passionate about diversity inclusion simply because I've had a lot of moments in my life where I have been excluded and I know what it feels to be excluded. I was born in Moscow, I grew up in New Zealand. I've had this bicultural experience when I was growing up in New Zealand, and that was not fun. And throughout my life, I've always been in situations where you know how it feels to be excluded. And since then, it had become a mission to build communities, bring people together, and make sure that everyone has safe space, has a voice, and doesn't feel like a minority, even though if they identify themselves as a minority. So that's me. I work with several companies around the world, and teach in several business schools in Berlin, but that's not the point of the discussion today. You can check me out later if you want. So the reason why this event series started, if you have attended the events before, you will know, is when those events in US happened, I felt a bit frozen and not knowing what to say and how to respond to that, not only by the fact what happened that, but the response of people around the world, especially on social media. Everybody started responding by going to protests, changing their Instagram or LinkedIn to black, or simply by writing a very tearful and very emotional post on LinkedIn. And my community, people I work with, they approached me and they said, Ola, you work in this area, you should respond to that, you should say something. And I thought, well, who am I to say anything about that? I'm a white privileged woman. I don't have anything to say about it. I don't have the right to say about it, anything about that. So that's how the first event started, the first event about white privilege and racism. And that's where we focused on Germany specifically. We identified all the terms and we heard the stories of people, and they were very, very relevant, focusing on the fact that all those discrimination and racism does not just happen in US, bad white people that happen there, but it also very relevant in Germany. And on top of that, I decided, okay, well, since there is a bit of a hype, so to say, about diversity now, it's time to educate and actually discuss other types of diversities and other terms related to diversity and inclusion. So it seemed to be very successful now. This event series, the nation base, so whatever donation, whoever's donated, thank you very much, is all going to be going to all non-profits that educate about discrimination, and so on and so forth in Germany. So without further ado, a bit of how it's going to be, a bit of housekeeping for today. So we have only 1.5 hours with you folks. So we are going to be a very tight on schedule. So we're going to be very brief, but very, very to the point. I'm going to send all the slides and all the information and all the sources to you later. So don't worry. If it's something very quick, it's something you don't follow, don't worry about it. I will share, I think, later, as well as a LinkedIn group that we have where all the resources are shared. So inclusive language is the topic for today, and we are going to focus only on English language today. We're not going to focus on Germany. I'm not a native German speaker, even though I speak German, but I'm not specialized in that, and I don't know that. So we're going to focus exclusively on English language today. And I invite us to have safe embrace space. So there is no such question that is stupid or silly or not good enough. I invite you to respect each other. At the same time, just for the sake of convenience, I would invite you to ask all your questions on Slido using the hashtag inclusive language. It's not because I want to silence you here on Zoom, but because it starts flashing. It's very distracting to both the audience, the speaker, and myself. So I will ask you for understanding. So without further ado, I'd like to jump straight into you, dear audience, so we can understand who you are, what are you here for, and what are your expectations. So now we will go to Slido and use hashtag inclusive language. And that's how I will start the poll. Why are you here? So just go to slido.com and hashtag inclusive language, all small letters. And there's several multiple choices and you can just enter. Okay, so we have 4 answers now. Thank you very much. So, okay, 5. Let's take a bit of time to see who is our audience is and what they expect here. So for now we have 50-50. I want to introduce inclusive language in my company and I want to learn about inclusive language for myself. Okay, so it's wonderful to see that in the world that we're in now, bombarded with information, you're still here to learn something new and not just for the sake of company or for the sake of the buzz. So this is for yourself. Wonderful. The last, the third answer, I want to know why everyone is changing pronouns on LinkedIn, was more like seeing if anybody is here to understand that. All right, wonderful. Moving on to the next question. What kind of inclusive language examples are you familiar with? So just write anything that you know. I know a lot of people would know that guys, don't use guys, don't use anything else. So whatever comes into your mind, what does it mean inclusive language to you? What kind of language it is? Whether it could be examples or whatever you have on your mind. Let's give a bit of couple of minutes. Okay, wonderful. Chairman with the chairperson. Wonderful. Husband, wife versus spouse. Very nice. Gender neutral job titles. Folks. Very nice. Yeah. If I got €1 every time I've heard the word guys at my favorite fitness classes, I will be a billionaire for now, I swear. It's like, hey guys, let's do some squats. I'm not a guy. Can I still do squats? But yeah, pronouns. Wonderful. Okay, okay. So pronouns, that's, if you have used Slido before, you will know that the biggest one is the most common. It's the most used, the most entered word on Slido, so to say, the most common answer. Okay, y'all. Inclusive holidays, not saying ladies, inclusive statements. Wonderful. Okay, we have a quite knowledgeable audience here right now. Wonderful. Very, very nice. Okay, cool. And as you know, we had a conversation with Taylor just before about pronouns on LinkedIn. And you're going to get more into that later during our discussion. But it's quite interesting to see how LinkedIn, and I know lots of people change their signature on email addresses, on email signature as well as on Zoom and so on and so forth, and LinkedIn for sure. Okay, wonderful. Let's move on. Let's go back to our slides. All right. So, according to Guidance for Inclusive Language of Linguistic Society of America, of US, linguistic language acknowledges diversity, is sensitive to differences, conveys respect to all people, and promotes equal opportunities. So I would like to get more into what kind of examples of inclusive language there are out there. We're going to be very brief, but just to show you some examples. And at the same time, don't forget that you can ask all your questions in Slido. Yeah, so Slido, the same hashtag inclusive language, just go there and ask all the questions. And throughout the conversation, throughout our chat, fireside chat, they're all going to be answered. They're going to be all monitored at the same time. So communication is not what you say, but how others hear it. And as you know, as many of you know, if you're already here, inclusive language is a very, very important part of that. But how do we hear the language? Yeah, what makes up what we actually hear? So it's body language, it's words, tone of voice. I'm sure many of you have seen this slide before, have seen this image before, but you know, especially when it comes to body language in virtual communication, how does it change the way we act and how does it make it inclusive? So, you know, tone of voice, words in body language really shape our communication. And words really do hurt, really can impact the way you feel, they can make you feel left out, and it's all part of microaggression, it's all part of whether they generate kindness or whether they want to destroy and crush you. So it's always, you know, microaggression, passive aggressive. They're not really seen. If you attended the event that we've had 2 weeks ago in about, sorry, I'm just trying to get someone to enter the Zoom. If you attended the first event that we had, you've heard that when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to discrimination in Germany, it's very, very subtle. It's not direct in your face. It's very kind of undercover. So you really need to decode it to actually understand that. Same with communication. Sometimes you don't really know whether to see it as somebody's trying to play against me or somebody's trying to offend me, or they're just having a bad joke, that they just told me a bad joke and that it's being inappropriate. So is it intentional, not intentional? But the language communicates with us in all those ways. So before we get into that, there are 8 different ways inclusive language is. So it's the first one is ask, people first language conveys respect, self-identification, active voice, parallelism, gender neutral, and proper nouns. I'm going to quickly go through all those, some of those aspects, and then we're going to go more into the panel discussion. So the first one could be very, very obvious, but unfortunately not everyone uses that, is when in doubt, ask. Yeah, and it happened to me many times where for the first time I met, it was in Berlin for the first time I met someone who's identified themselves as non-binary, and I simply was frozen because it was my first experience. It was 4 years ago, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to address the person. And then the first question, people know when you have bad intention or good intentions. So if you really have good intention, just ask. There is no shame in that, and no one needs to be perfect. So don't be afraid to make a mistake and not to be perfect, just ask. So that's number one thing you need to know. It is quite obvious, but people forget about that. And the second one is using people first language and not physical characteristics. So we hear quite often the way, oh, it's a disabled person, it's a wheelchair-bound person, it's a blind person. And my favorite, especially in Berlin startup scene, it's a female founder or female engineer. We need more female engineers. So what does it tell us? It focuses on the characteristics and not on the actual person. So in order to avoid that, we need to put the person first. So, you know, as you can see, I'm not going to go through all of that, but, you know, person with disability, or a woman on our engineering team, a person of color, person with mental illness, person who uses a wheelchair. So you really, really focus on a person. And it's just like learning a new language. You make mistakes, you forget. It's me using them instead of der or then when I speak German. I always forget, you know, and unless you train your train your brain through that, you will always end up doing that. So train yourself, and just put a list, print it out, and just put it on a wall to be more inclusive, because as we evolve as a society, our language should evolve as well. So the next one, this one, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you probably have seen this one before, in terms of how LinkedIn has changed some of the settings, which I'm going to move into later. But how inclusive communication, inclusive language, it might be sometimes not very inclusive for people who have non-Western sounding names. And especially goes to people who come from countries that you've never been to or you don't have any friends with. And people, what does it mean that sometimes when you enter workplace, people cannot pronounce your name, and they either try to change it in a way that it's easier for them to pronounce, or ask you, can I use, Mike or Jane instead of your name? So what does it leave us as people? It becomes, you erase your own personality, and people don't really try to pronounce your name properly. They don't really respect you. And that might be, it's just not only lack of respect or lack of trying to put an effort into that. So when, as we have here from the speaker, when my colleague don't bother putting in the work of pronouncing my name correctly, I sense that I'm not worth the effort. So please do make an effort. And LinkedIn done a very, very cool thing recently. It's literally last week. So you can add your name pronunciation. So Ola Jonhirius, that's my name. So if you click, if you see someone's, you go to someone's LinkedIn profile, you see a little icon here, you click on that and you actually hear someone pronouncing their own name in the way that it is properly pronounced. Well, I did that myself, and then unfortunately my husband told me that I'm not pronouncing my name properly, so that's my bad. Jonhirius, I don't have the ha of the Dutch ha, but anyway, I tried. So that's a story. And if you really want to put an extra effort, I would really encourage you to go to pronouncenames.com. It's a website that has a database of all the names from all around the world. And if you're speaking with someone on LinkedIn, for example, or new colleague that you don't really know how to pronounce the name, put an extra effort. Really try. It takes you 5 minutes to do, but it really makes a difference for people. I've been told so many times, like hola, 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 or Olga, which I completely hate. But if people put an extra effort into that, it really shows respect. So it makes you feel like you included in that. And the next point I would like to talk about very briefly is parallelism. It's terms of equal status. So here we see that Klaus Schneider and Katrine is incorrect. So it's more like Klaus Schneider and Katrine Schwarz. That puts people on the same status and the same respectful level. And the most important one is, I hear it quite often, transgender people and normal people, and which is not exactly, transgender people are also normal people. So use the correct terms, don't put people on a lower status than they actually are. And the most common one, what we hear in Berlin and what is happening around the world now, is definitely gender inclusive terms, gender inclusive language, and gender inclusive recruitment. When we use specific words that are more associated with female traits or male traits. So, as we mentioned before, not using guys, but using folks, using he or she, using them. They don't know what person what kind of pronoun person is associating themselves with. And as mentioned before, gender neutral language is to be used as a source of being inclusive. And the good way to do that, if you want to do it for your own recruitment, when you want to recruit someone, is to either use Textio that identifies what kind of the potential mistakes, what kind of potential connotation with a particular job position or promotion or any sort of content writing that you make, and they give you a little bit, it's more like a Grammarly, but more for the gender inclusivity. And the next one is also very good, is Gender Decoder. So just before the event, I went to Indeed and got a couple of job advertisements and entered into Job Decoder. And some of them were very, very interesting. There was interesting parallel in terms of if it's a customer service, it was very strongly feminine coded. When it was something to do with product or IT, it was very male coded. So this website really helps you to identify more of a neutral standard. Yeah. So as we see here, active, adventurous, driven, ninja, lead, rockstar, superhero, it's very male-driven words. So how can you make sure that all your female potential employees or whoever wants to apply for your job are not scared away by that? Because as we know, for example, there have been studies done that 60% of that it was said that males apply for a job when the job is relevant to 60%, and females when it's about 90%. Yeah, so if there's some sort of unconscious words that your potential candidate might not want to associate yourself with, that they might not even apply for your job. Yeah, something to bear in mind. And I will send you all the links after. So, and we have discussed before about gender pronouns, she, he, they. This is all very straightforward. And we also discussed this, Taylor, just before in terms of how many non-binary people that we know in Berlin, and we haven't really met anyone who uses sie. So if you know anyone and you would like to share a story, maybe it's you that identifies with sie, please share it in the slide. We're very, very curious to hear that, because we don't really position ourselves that we know it all, that we big experts in everything. We are here to also learn from you, dear folks. So this is a very, very quick introduction. It's very, very quick, as I mentioned before. So just to introduce you all these kind of aspects, and let me change the settings. Just give me a second. Okay, cool. Zoom is working now. So it was a very quick introduction in terms of what inclusive language is. So now we are going to go more into an active part, where we're going to speak about our wonderful presenter here. It's more of like a fireside chat presentation. Taylor, can you hear me?
Sure can. Hi.
Brilliant. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. So can you please tell us who you are and why you're here and where do you work?
Well, who am I? Hi, my name is Taylor Krasko-Hermerding. I am, I guess, loosely construed a linguist. So I've studied linguistics. I've worked in like academic research labs. I've worked for other language learning apps, worked in real estate companies. But so I'm a linguist. My research areas were kind of focused on language acquisition, bilingualism, and kind of the social aspects that went along with that. But currently I work for Babbel as a content editor. So that means that I work on if you ever use Babbel as a learner, I or one of my colleagues will have probably written the English learning content, or if you're using Babbel to learn a different language, say Spanish, French, Italian, Indonesian, then one of my colleagues or I have probably written the display language if you're using it as an English speaker learning one of those languages. We do a lot more. We're also doing kind of some cool live chats on Facebook right now, like expert ask me anything videos on linguistics and language learning. Feel free to tune in and see if we have one for the language you speak. So yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant. I'm a big fan of Babel. Not in terms of, I'm sorry I don't use the app, but I know that you folks have an amazing company culture. I'm not getting paid for that, I swear to the audience. I'm not getting commission for anything that I'm saying here, but Bubble has one of the most amazing company cultures that I know. And every person, I swear, every person I met from Bubble is insanely cool. It's just like, if met someone just this Saturday, a friend of my husband, and I told him in advance, like, you work for Babel now, you must be cool. There is no other way. So there is my little promotion for Babel, because if you're looking for a job, Babel is amazing. But the reason why we're here is that I saw a very interesting article from Babel, from Zach, a couple of weeks ago, that talked about inclusive language in Babel, and there was a little boom in my head. I was like, oh, it's perfect, it's amazing. So the article basically talked about how inclusion and how the inclusivity in the way Babel works and Babel creates content, it's very unique compared to any other language app or language generator that I know. And would you like to talk a little bit about that? What does it mean, inclusion, when it comes to Babel? What does it mean, inclusive language, when it comes to Babel, and why?
Yeah, so inclusive language, I mean, we don't want to alienate anybody. We want, when you're learning, and especially when you're learning, you're going to do a lot better if you can recognize yourself and if you feel represented and seen by the content that you're learning. And so inclusive language, that means we have to cater to all of our learners. And so what is our audience? Everyone. So that is a huge span of people. So we, like, it's not like we have, you know, some kind of checkbox like, oh, okay, we had a woman in our course. Yeah, like we had a gender non-binary person. Like like the existence of a checkbox or a checklist would indicate that, you know, somehow there is a way that we could encompass every person of every background, of every different experience. And that's not true. And so it's one thing I think that we do really well, and was really impressed upon me when I started at the company, was that we have to really keep in mind not only, you know, who might be learning this language, who might be reading this content, but also, like, who are we and what perspective are we writing from? So and this is kind of like goes into a bigger conversation of like, what does it mean to use inclusive language? But recognizing, you know, what are the biases that I have within myself that I'm coming into a conversation with, or into, you know, like writing this English course, and like getting a sense check from someone else, like, hey, like, you know, I can only speak from my perspective. So, you know, I'm a female, I'm cisgendered, I'm queer, I'm Latina. So I may miss things when I'm writing a course. Like I can't speak what it's like to be Black, or to be a male, or to be gender non-binary. So we do a lot of discussion within the company, and especially within our content editors, about like kind of unconscious bias, and making sure that we're representing all kinds of diversity. And so we actually talk a lot about diversity that maybe might not be such a no-brainer. So I guess if you were to write a course, and if I were to make you one of our editors right now, what kind of diversity metrics do you think you would keep in mind when you were writing?
Oh, you put me on the spot here. I mean, definitely, you know, our traditional diversity is that every, you know, the sexual orientation, sexual preference, the race, religion, gender, age, diversity of thought, backgrounds in terms of economic background, by you parent or not, the educational background, professional association, so to say, whether you abilities, disabilities, special needs. What else? Yeah, whether, yeah, it could be anything. Even I've seen this sometime in Bible when it's whether you adopted a child, it could be just anything. It's just
Yeah.
such a such a diverse world.
So you've hit basically almost every single one of our categories, like nail
Okay,
on the
wow,
head.
you cover all of that. Wow.
Yeah, but it's really hard to do this in a way that feels natural. And so this is another thing we talk about is like diversity it doesn't necessarily need to be in your face, but
Mm-hmm.
so all right, like I want to include homosexuality or like a homosexual couple in the course that I'm writing. Do I have to write a scenario in which people are at a pride parade and because like lesbians only exist during Pride Week, like at the Pride
Exactly,
parade, right?
right?
Like I am far more likely to, go to the supermarket and see a lesbian couple, or like, go to the movies and see a lesbian couple. Like it doesn't have to be contrived, and it doesn't have to be, some kind of special situation. Same thing with, people, like a person who uses a wheelchair also goes to the grocery store, like goes to the cinema, enjoys the park on a sunny day. You don't have to make diversity about showing diversity. It just needs to be diverse groups of people, diverse people with different backgrounds, different experiences, doing just the same thing as everyone else.
I really like it. It's more like putting people in natural environments instead of putting them on pedestal and promoting something about. Yeah, it's wonderful. I did see one of the photos when there was a question like, did Pedro and Mike adopted a child
Yeah,
or not?
that's
And I
that's
find
a
it
really,
beautiful.
yeah, that's actually, I would say, one limitation we have in showing diversity and being inclusive is we are a bit limited at this point to images.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're trying to show diversity, it's very hard to do that through stock photos. And one thing I find often when I'm trying to put a photo into a course is, like I want to see a diverse group of people doing mundane everyday tasks, whatever it is that I'm writing about. And I'll see a really great photo. Maybe it'll be someone who is visibly not white, or maybe like visibly queer, like if there is such a thing, right? But then it's the premium, and so you have to have a premium subscription to like a double premium to Getty or to Adobe Stock, and I don't love that. Oh yeah, like you can be diverse, but here, like pay us way extra money in order to have like a diverse representation in your visual imagery.
Yeah, so you basically implying that you want something unusual, something
Yeah, exactly. It
extra,
it, it
something more.
otherizes it, something more. Yeah.
Interesting. And what I admired the most, and I really admired, and I was laughing out loud, I had to, like 2 minutes after reading the article, I had to find Zach on LinkedIn and just like ask him to let's speak. I was born in Moscow and I speak fluent Russian, and I grew up in New Zealand. And the article about Babel, that the article about Babel wrote, it was that you had a very political and very dangerous, I'll have to really say dangerous, advertisement, like a campaign where you place two females and two males, and in a way that learning a language, but the way Russian language works, it's very, very sexist in this way. Is that when you say zamужем, it's like I'm married as a woman, you're like, I'm behind a man. And when you say женат, you're married as a man, it's like you're taking a wife. And you twist it all around by saying жената или за. So it's like really, really twisting, really lots of puns and and I find it so clever and really, really dangerous, looking at the political situation in Russia, especially with the changed constitution last week. Whew. But really, what is the fine line of, playing, especially with politics and using inclusive language? Because would you also might sometimes alienate some of your other learners who might not want to associate themselves, who have that love Bubble app, but they don't really have the same values, or they see it as a very important thing to point it out. as someone who is, very, very heterosexual and does not
Mhm.
believe in anything else? Where is the line? How would you keep your customers, and so to say, at the same time satisfy?
I would, and I will clarify that I do not speak on behalf of Babbel, but I speak
Absolutely.
as a person who works for Babbel. But even actually in a conversation I had with Zach the other day, like diversity and inclusion is not, that's not a nice to have. It's the, for education, for a language app, for anything, it's the bare minimum.
Mm.
And we have been having a lot of internal discussions as a company, in light of kind of the talks that have been spurred by the George Floyd murder and protests ensuing that event. But diversity, racism, any kind of ism doesn't really have a place within our product. And we actively are soliciting this feedback. And, the executives have done a really good job of encouraging us to speak up, encouraging us to start dialogues. And it's the same with the content. Language reflects the world around us. And as long as there are queer folks, are folks of color, are, folks with impairments, then that will be represented in our product. And it's a matter of doing justice to the world around us, not to catering to folks who don't care to see the world as it is.
Absolutely, I agree with that. And I find the Babbel content super interesting and inclusive. And the question is Babbel the way it is because it's in Berlin, or Babbel is in Berlin because Babbel is as it is?
Well, so we also, I don't know if we also have an office in New York City. I would say, and this is not based in any kind of actual analysis that the company has done of itself, but I do think, because this tended to be the case when I was in academia as well, language tends to be, folks who are interested in this tend to be pretty curious, pretty open. And I would say that there's an element of that, we're a learning company. We're very interested in learning and being curious. But I think the company itself also attracts people who really want to make a change and make a difference. And within that space, I think you tend to be a bit more sensitive and inclusive anyway.
Mm-hmm. Does inclusive language differ by department in Babbel?
It doesn't differ in the sense that, only didactics. So the department I work for is didactics. So we do the learning content, we do podcasts, videos, that kind of thing. Any kind of the strictly education stuff is my department. But so it doesn't differ in the sense that, only didactics cares about diversity. We do actually, so we were probably the first department to institute kind of these diversity guidelines. And this is a lot in thanks to Vitor, who is quoted in that article that Zach wrote. So he is, his background is in gender studies. And so I think it's a lot of the credit for really getting these conversations going in earnest within the department. But we take kind of these diversity guidelines, how do we use inclusive language? How do we represent diversity? We implement these all in different ways throughout different departments. So for example, in didactics, when we're teaching, when we're writing grammar explanations as well, we try to avoid situations that would be seen as stereotypical. So in our dialogues, women are not just gossiping or going shopping. We try to show, because women are executives, women fill all kinds of spaces. And so we try to represent that. We try not to have very gendered grammar examples. And so this is a little bit difficult and this is kind of a more language structural thing. So there's grammatical gender, like Russian, Spanish, languages that mark gender within the grammar. And so this does actually have a kind of a neurological effect on how you perceive the world. So people who come from native speakers of languages with grammatical gender tend to, when they learn a language without grammar, so say, you know, I'm a Spanish speaker and I've learned English. If someone asked me, like, what name would you give a table? So a table, la mesa, is feminine in Spanish. There have actually been studies done that have shown that I'm probably more likely to give a table a feminine name in English. So we do think about this. Because grammatical gender exists, it's hard to get rid of it, but we have strategies to kind of take the gender a bit out of the equation. So in our French, for example, we use an interpunct, which is like a little dot that shows the difference between the masculine and the feminine endings. So we show both, always, always, always. In Spanish, you can also use the at symbol. So so Spanish grammatical endings are O and A. And we use the at symbol, because it kind of shows both. We also talk a little bit about Spanish oftentimes uses the X at the end of a word to signify that it can also be non-gendered. And this is a very new linguistic innovation. But so we take all of this into account when we're writing educational content in didactics. Our photos we've talked about a little bit, like, you know, if we want to teach the vocab word, the longboard, you know, why would we not have, you know, like folks who wear headscarves, like they longboard. So it's these little opportunities we have to show people in spaces that, like in a mainstream way of thinking, you might not think to see a person in the situation. So we do that in didactics. In content marketing, we actually, and this is something that I guess could also extend to other companies, right? Like we're really mindful of our reading level. So we try to keep it to an American grade 9, because we have all kinds of audiences. We have, you know, not our whole audience, not all of our learners went to a university. We have people who use the app who are like 80, 90 years old. And so not using very slangy language or any kind of country specific language. And this is also a form of inclusion, not writing, you know, marketing content that is so specific to one market that it's totally alien to someone else. We also try to break down our academic language. You know, we are learning, but we don't need to be so nerdy about it. And in HR, so recruiting, we try to avoid those very masculine biased words in our job ads. When we localize, we try to make sure that our sentences, our copy works for all genders and that no one feels excluded. So we try to avoid stereotypes. We use like simple language, positive, respectful understanding, a lot of what you were talking about with the inclusive language guidelines.
So would it mean also in a way that you're moving towards, there's a term, not sure if it's a correct term, but like globish English, so to say, it's not simplified? Yeah,
a little bit, just it not, because and especially working in a very international company as an American, sometimes I'll use like an idiom or a turn of phrase and then just get a blank stare and realize, oh no. Oh no, what did I just do? But it's really good to be mindful of these things, that just like your natural mode of engaging with the world is not relevant to everyone else. And that's, yeah.
There's no shared context, so to say, so you really need to have a lot of context.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, not assuming that they will know this idiom or
whatever. And this is even, I would say that not only just with the content that we produce externally, but even internally, I think that people are very mindful of the way that they communicate on Slack or in emails. And I think are really quite mindful about like not using like super gendered language. And this may be just a hang up from teaching, because when I would teach and send emails to the students, I remember the first time I ever wanted to send an email saying like, hey guys, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that for me, if I say guys, it's not gendered for me. it doesn't matter what my intent is, but if the impact is that someone's going to read that and feel excluded, so much better to, I'll tip my hat to the Texans. Y'all is a great way to address people. It's not gendered. It's includes multiple people. Yeah.
Y'all.
Y'all.
Love it. Yeah, the guys, it's it took me quite some time to actually learn it, relearn, like learn to unlearn. I think that's the best thing you can do now. There's so many biases and there's so many things that they're just so embedded in us that unless we really practically every day, remind ourselves to change the way we speak, you're not going to be able to do it otherwise.
It takes a lot of conscious effort.
Yeah. There I had actually a story that's very, very embarrassing for me, especially as a diversity, someone who works in diversity inclusion. But I think it's important to share that everybody makes mistakes, even someone who works in the field and somebody who's so committed to it. I was delivering a training about unconscious bias to one of the companies in Berlin, very big company, very big startup. So, and at some stage, my computer just decided to play. We just shut down. I couldn't set up the slides, and it took a couple of minutes. I'm getting really nervous. There's a big audience, and at some stage, I'm like, oh, I really hope you're not going to think I'm like a retard that I can't fix my technology. I said that, and I'm like, oh my god.
Did anybody say anything to you?
Yeah, they did. They did that very quietly during the break, and I didn't even realize. That's the thing. I didn't even realize because I said it because I was so nervous. I was so stressed out. And I just said it. And then, okay, let's have a break now. And then someone came to me and said, oh, you said that, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, thank you so much. And then after the break, I announced that for anybody who hasn't noticed. I think it's very important, especially the training like that. I thought it's very, very important to point out. Because sure, it's not about using the word, but using its negative connotation. That's what kind of threw me off my professional. So, and I think it's what is important here is just to, no one is perfect. It's important to see that, yes, we do make mistakes. Yes, but it's okay. As long as you can either ask for the correct word to use or just admit your mistake and move on. Mm-hmm. If you kind of pretend that it's, come on, stop being so sensitive. Everybody's so sensitive nowadays,
Yeah.
And I find it super interesting. So we also talked about it with you, the way, sure, whether it's people becoming so sensitive or the world becoming more inclusive, what is happening, especially on LinkedIn. Everybody's changing their pronouns on LinkedIn now.
Yeah. Which
what
now
do you think about that?
Now I feel like I should go like put my pronouns on LinkedIn. But so this is another thing. I am very lucky. I identify with the body I was born into. And so it's not necessarily, in that sense, relevant for me to specify my pronouns. But at the same time, I have this, I don't know, like if I want to call it like cisgender privilege, but it costs me absolutely nothing except a few characters in my LinkedIn bio description, whatever, to put my pronouns. And if enough people do that, especially because people are noticing now, oh, so-and-so has pronouns. You scroll through LinkedIn and you see, she, her, hers, they, them, theirs, he, him. And if we normalize this, like putting out of pronouns on LinkedIn, then it creates the space and support for other people to specify theirs if they don't identify with their visual body. So I think it's really interesting, and I think it's good that we're noticing now. Mm-hmm. That's what means that it's working.
Absolutely. I don't have pronouns on my LinkedIn, and I think a lot of diversity inclusion professionals that I know have it, some don't. For me, it's a question of I will do it, but in my own time as well. Mm-hmm. And I understand that it's you know, I work in this area, but I also see a lot of people jumping on board just for the sake of doing that. And
Yeah,
I'm always the person who's like, oh, everybody does that. Oh, I'm not
it's,
gonna do that. Just
I think it's
I was ready
hard.
to do that, and when it's suddenly like everybody's, I was like, okay, that's just, is it social pressure? I don't know, but I will do it at some stage soon.
I think it's hard to feel not performative
Mm.
about it, but
I also want to know more and more and like meet people and talk about that before completely dedicate myself to that. So
yeah.
just to understand the concept better. We have a couple of questions actually on
On the Slido.
how does this play out in the content team at Babel on a practical level? Is it an extra step in the content creation process or part of the process?
Okay, so I'm going to combine that with the one just above it. Do you have a methodology for addressing exclusive language and content in existing courses, not just avoiding it when producing new content? So both of these together. So the implementation of our, like, let's call them diversity guidelines, that is, from my understanding, rather new. I believe within the past, this is kind of like the culmination of an ongoing series of talks for the past couple of years. And so so for sure now it is actually it is included within the content creation process. So we go through an extensive set of internal review. So, you know, I write something or my other colleague on the English team writes something. It immediately, before any kind of further development, is sent to members of other languages, or, you know, someone outside the department perhaps, to read and kind of sense check, you know, have I missed something here? Because again, like, we can only speak from, we can only write from the places that we're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And we may miss something just simply because we're not looking for it, or we're not thinking to look for it, in fact. So that happens, and then, you know, we go through, we have all of our images, and then we get also an external check, so someone from outside the company entirely.
Oh, really?
And then a further round of review from internally, so that now when we're putting out a finished product, it's had several sets of eyes, several different perspectives, both internally and externally. So that, I think, I really appreciate that. But in terms of addressing current content that is already out there, we rely, up until this point, we have relied pretty heavily upon customer service reports, or customers contacting us directly and saying, hey, you know, why is this here? Like, what do you think about this? What are you trying to convey with this? Or straight up, you know, I find this offensive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, this actually came up a couple of weeks ago, and it's very easy to kind of fall into the trap of, well, you know, as a native speaker, I don't find this offensive, or you shouldn't think this is offensive. But it's intent versus impact. It doesn't matter what the intent was when we wrote this content, whomever wrote this content, however many years ago. The impact is that someone did not feel good about it, and that's an opportunity to go, okay, hey, there's always room for improvement. How can we make this better? And so we're actually, I guess, to that first content, or that first question, you know, are we only looking at producing new content, or are we kind of looking at our existing stuff too? We are for sure looking at our existing stuff now. And I think that this has been kind of a really good kick in the butt.
Mm-hmm.
So
that. It's more about inclusion by design.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are now building that in, but you know,
Mm-hmm.
some of the stuff has been in our content for 10 years, 11 years. I think that was
and the world has evolved so much since
yeah,
then.
exactly.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So quite interesting what you said about you get someone external. Do you have like a inclusion police coming and checking your content?
We have I think a pretty hefty set of freelancers, and we kind of look for different things from our freelancers. So we have some people that we specifically want looking at, kind of sense checking our own, you know, we think that this is free of bias, but tell us what you think. And I think that even just the act of asking for feedback, like, is, again, like, bare minimum. but we're always very open to being told, hey, nah, don't do that. Hey, this is wrong. Hey, maybe you didn't intend to, portray this some kind of way, but you did.
Where is the line of being overly sensitive? And I know it's a tough question. Where is the line of being overly sensitive and doing your job? Because if everybody is kind of, sort of related to the question you have on the slide, do you have any advice on how to react when somebody is calling you overly sensitive after you've pointed out that something is not inclusive? So where is the line for you to proceed to do your work as a company, create new content, and there is always someone who can be offended? I know there is no rule of thumb, so to say, but what are your thoughts?
Well, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
When someone calls you overly sensitive, I think and this is hard because I feel like we have a really good kind of internal culture that like, if someone tells you something's wrong, then something's wrong. Like, it doesn't matter if you don't think you were doing anything wrong. If someone knows something, you kind of have to just internalize it. So I guess that's coming from the other side. But if someone tells you like, oh, you're being overly sensitive, I think a really good response to even any kind of microaggression is, what do you mean by that?
Just to clarify. Yeah.
Because putting someone in a position where they have to explain, maybe a racist or a sexist or like that kind of point of view, I think makes it, then it's a conversation. It's not aggressive on your part to ask someone to clarify what they mean. But it's also hard because anybody can be offended by anything. But you have to have the justification to, I think that we don't ask people or like don't tell people like, no, you're wrong.
Don't point it out straight away.
Yeah,
like,
unless we have a really good reason.
And sometimes, for sure, there are lots of microaggressions in intended sexism and racism, or whatever not. But sometimes we live, as you mentioned before as well, we live such a globish English, and there's so many intercultural, multinational worlds. Sometimes something comes across as rude. It's just a very cultural thing that it's not, doesn't have intention, in a way that, especially when you have accents or the way you use imperatives in some languages, in Spanish and Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese use imperatives to get anything. You don't use, oh, could I please have this? You're like, give me this. You just change this intonation. And I know for sure I've had lots of situations when I've seen people being really offended. So you speak English with your own personal grammar and your cultural appropriation, so to say. It's very important to clarify things.
Yeah. What has have you had a good response for if someone tells you that you're being overly sensitive? Have you bumped into that?
I have. I'm married. Sometimes. Yes. And I think I always say the problem with communication is a lack of communication. And I wish I could practice what I preached as well, but sometimes, we're only humans. Clarify. Just
what do you mean by that?
But exactly. And I'm usually quite calm person, but I do have quite a bit of temper. People who know me, then they know that. And sometimes I just don't think and jump into emotions and jump in, explode. And then I've learned to really slow down and clarify before jump to conclusions. And also sometimes you could, something that it's, instead of being really offended and creating big drama out of that, you tell the person, I don't think it's respectful. I don't like what you said. And the person like, oh, why? Because this and this and that. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I won't do it again.
Yeah.
Done. Because otherwise you could have a big scandal every 5 minutes to anyone when you work, where you friends with, people on the street. Sometimes just like pointing it out directly, like, I don't find it respectful. I find it
Yeah.
offensive because this, and this. Oh, sorry about that. Because people don't realize you can't blame people for not knowing things and your boundaries. You
Yeah,
need to set your
exactly.
own boundaries first.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. I love that. What do you think? Oh, okay, that's the question for you. What do you think of using X instead of A, that O in Spanish?
I am personally a huge fan.
Yeah.
Uh,
Will you
so,
first describe what it is?
yeah, okay. So in Spanish, so specifically a really good example of this is the word by which, and I actually don't know how prevalent this is in Europe, but in the States at least, you know, we're very, I think, unhealthily concerned with like, oh, where do you come from? What are you? And so it's not uncommon, especially within academia, I'm thinking of like academic Twitter, when everybody has like in their bios what they are.
Mm-hmm.
It's not uncommon to have like, you know, oh, Latino, Latina, Latinx. So person of Latin American descent. And I actually like, I think I really like Latinx because it takes just the gender entirely out of the statement. You are a Latin person. You know, maybe you're male, maybe you're female, maybe you're gender non-binary. I think that there is a lot of pushback from older Spanish speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And although I would argue that this is maybe not limited to Spanish speakers, but to kind of older generations in general, like this, there seems to be a bit of like, well, I've always used these words, like why aren't they right? Certainly the Royal Academy, the entity in Spain that governs the use of the Spanish language, is not a huge fan.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that I've heard the same from the French Academy, but that's also I think it's like 36 men and 5 women.
Oh, okay, I wonder why.
Yeah, I wonder why. I think it's great, but again, it's, you know, people are free to self-identify, and so it's kind of interesting to me to see the kind of the distribution of people that identify as Latinx specifically versus Latino or Latina.
Mm-hmm.
But that's quite a rabbit hole. You then in the US you also get into all the politics of, oh, are you Latino or are you Chicano? And so origin comes into play a lot there. But you also have Chicanx in the States, so person of Mexican descent living in the US.
Okay, wow. Sometimes I get a little bit overwhelmed with all these definitions, to be honest.
Yeah.
And it's evolving every day. And I feel a little bit of pressure sometimes to learn all of that. And I mean, one of the reasons why I decided to start this series is that we have all this information, especially with the murder of George Floyd, a lot of terms, so they're like throwing into that. And a lot of people, I talk to a lot of people and they say, I don't want to talk about it because simply I feel that I should know these things and I don't know. I don't know what white fragility is. I don't know what women X means. I don't really know all this. I don't know what transgender means. And then people kind of shut themselves down because they're just afraid to sound or look stupid.
Yeah.
I think it's really important just to speak, and it's a normal, like in a natural ways. And I know like in English also women X, there is
Yeah.
lots of communities that I know. There's a freelance Women X community also in Berlin.
Oh.
So it's also used in English, or also used in this kind of good. Tricky question. And that doesn't have the right answer. What is the best way to talk about diversity?
I think it's really, it's a lot of soft skills. I think you can do all of the reading that you want on all of like the like social gender, all you can read all these things. It's always going to be changing, and so we're never going to arrive at a solution like, yes, we have created you know, inclusive language, we've achieved diversity. It's not a checkbox. It's not going to happen. But I think a huge first step is just starting those conversations. I have worked in plenty of contexts that, you know, you get your, at least in the States, you get your diversity training when you start, and it's never mentioned again. And that doesn't stop microaggressions from happening. It doesn't stop people from maybe even just being straight up racist. It doesn't stop company emails from using more male gendered language or non-inclusive language. But nobody's going to change if you don't actually talk about it. And so even though I feel like there is this kind of like paralyzing fear of, you know, now that we're having these conversations, suddenly like we have to use the right language, we have to say the right thing. And I think the Instagram, like blacking out Instagram was a really good example of this, because everyone was saying, oh, black out your Instagram, post the black square. And then immediately after, oh no, delete the black square, you're blocking the protest resources, you know, you need to delete it. And this was all in the span of, I mean, I feel like it happened in Europe time and then the States time for me. So when Europe time had transitioned into morning States time, all the people in the States were saying, delete it, delete it, delete it. But it can feel very, very hectic, very almost like you're getting whiplash. Okay, I learned this thing and I said the right thing, and now someone's told me it's wrong. Okay, if someone told you it's wrong, you should probably listen to them. That's, I think the best way to talk about diversity is to A, start a conversation, B, be persistent and keep having these conversations, because no one's going to have these conversations for you. No one else is going to start this discussion. C, probably be willing to be told that you're wrong. And instead of getting defensive about it, or, well, no, actually I'm right, because I read in this book that, no, someone tells you this was wrong, say, okay, thank you, internalize it and try again and try better. It's never going to be easy. It's never going to be fun. But, you know, also being the recipient of racism or sexism or any kind of ism isn't that fun. And especially if you get to occupy these like white dominated, male dominated, any kind of space where there aren't that many folks of color or folks of different backgrounds, no one's going to stand up for these people if you don't.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm always, you know, also referring back to the event we had, the first event, is that someone like me, and, you know, I hate to say that, and that was not actually even me who said that, but someone like me who is a white privileged woman, I have a stronger voice when it comes to racism and discrimination, simply because I'm not associated with this group. And the same way, a man speaking up on women's rights and equality and equity will have a stronger voice. So I really think we need to have this kind of allies that can listen in a sort of say minority groups, or people of color, or whatever group they need to represent, to listen to the stories and then speak in white places, or places of this man that so as someone once said, bratwurst party. I find it's a very nice way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I bumped into this surprisingly quite a bit in academia. I was the recipient of a like a person of color fellowship, because I am half Mexican. My family background is Mexico on that side, but I'm very white passing, and I have a white last name, Hermerding, specifically for that reason. And so LinkedIn now I have both, but Carrasco and Hermerding. But so I got to pass in this very cushy white space, and someone made a comment about Mexicans in front of me one time, and I was like, it's really curious, like, can you tell me what you mean by that? Oh, you know, like tried to like play off the joke, and I was like, well, it's really funny because I'm Mexican actually. Like, oh, I had no clue. You just don't look Mexican. What does that mean? Oh, I mean, you just like, you don't like talk Mexican. What does that mean? Oh, I'm so sorry. It's just, and so I kept just, you know, what does that mean? Can you explain that? and got an apology actually a couple of days later from that particular colleague. And it was like, I'm so sorry, I had no clue. I was like, I know you probably didn't, but that you need to hear how you sounded. And I know that you probably don't intend to be a racist person, but this is the impact that this has when you say these things. And but it's being able to walk in those spaces, you get the chance to kind of needle and start a conversation where otherwise it would just be a funny punchline to a racist joke.
Yes, kind of like, oh, he's just kidding. Doesn't mean that, or she doesn't mean that.
Yep.
And then, maybe for you it would not hurt, but for someone else who cannot stand up for themselves, it will be, somebody will end up crying in the toilet, right?
Exactly.
I had similar situations when when somebody was making fun of, Russian women or whatever not, and they thought I'm a complete New Zealander, and then I was like, oh, right, tell me more. What do you think about Russian? It's like, and he got like, oh no, I didn't mean all,
Oh,
but
not
you're
you.
different. You're grabbing. You're
Yeah.
different.
Yep.
You're different. You all are. You're like Kiwi. You grew up in New Zealand. You didn't come to Europe to get visa. And I'm like, oh well,
Whoa.
okay. Let's talk. So
Let's talk about visa marriages, huh?
yeah. Well, it's once again, it's when you can speak up, speak up.
Yeah.
Don't let
Exactly.
it just.
Exactly.
Yeah, super interesting. I love the conversation. Let me check if we have more questions. Yes, we do have questions. Comment on how to speak about diversity. I feel allies can be powerful. A white person dressing racist is listened. Thank you. Exactly as we just mentioned. Thank you so much for the comment. And we have another question. When do you get the good feeling that diversity is respected and lived inclusion happens in particular company? Any 1 to 3 examples? That's a very good question. There is I would say it's very difficult to measure the diversity and inclusion per se. I actually had a very, very interesting conversation with someone who's going to speak at the LGBTQI plus event in August. And she mentioned that she started as an open source project for, if you know Glassdoor.
Yeah.
She started the one for LGBT plus Glassdoor.
Whoa.
Amazing initiative.
Oh,
So come to the event in August, and I find it such an amazing initiative just to actually measure, and not just, I'm not going to spill all the beans, but not just about the level of that, but do you have all gender toilets in the company? See, all this kind of small thing that really make a difference.
yeah.
So what do you think? You have any other aspects of how do you measure any companies that you can think? I know that Zalando has a very big diversity inclusion department. They're probably one of the biggest ones in Berlin from what I know of, and quite a big employee resource group. I don't know the level of diversity, I just know what they do. But I wouldn't have any companies on top of my head to point out. I know Babo probably.
Yeah, we do. We have a really fantastic initiative set up by a couple Babylonians called Stranger Talks. And so oh my gosh, it's a really, and it's so easy to just take this as a given that, every other week we have a talk on some kind of like diverse or inclusive topic put on specifically like by Babel folks for Babel folks. But we have over 750 employees, and like each one of those people has a perspective, and that's kind of the idea behind the Stranger Talks, is to you're like, what is your lived experience, and how does it impact your life, how does it impact how you work. So there's that. I think the fact that there is kind of a diversity and inclusion component built into our content production, I think is fantastic. I don't know of anyone else that certainly nowhere I've worked or produced content for previously has taken this into consideration. We also, I mean, even just in the way that we construct our courses, we don't just write, this is how you learn English. We take whatever the native language of the learner is and take that into account when we're writing. So we localize our grammar explanations. We also take into account any kind of cultural relevant topics.
Interesting. So it's really personalized depending on the language. Okay.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Beautiful, beautiful. Any other companies that I wouldn't really, I don't want to promote anyone. I know some companies that are really, really good, but it's just my personal perspective. And I think what matters is, I personally a huge fan of Lunch and Learn, and the discussion groups and storytelling. I think storytelling is very, very powerful in sharing the story, that you wouldn't even know the perspective. You have to create a safe space to hear someone else's story, that you wouldn't really know anything about, that you wouldn't really ask otherwise in a different environment. Someone who is Muslim or someone who is non-binary or so on and so forth. And then you create a safe space and people are educated and they have a connection to a person. Storytelling is really, really powerful. Wonderful. We have just a couple of more minutes left. I would invite everyone to post the questions if they have any questions in Slido, and we'll proceed with the question that we have so far already. Let's move into a little bit of devil's advocate, and I know you're gonna hate this question, so get ready. So, we mentioned before that everyone is changing pronouns on LinkedIn. You and I haven't done it yet, but the question is, where is the line? Can someone call themselves any pronoun and any name they want? What if someone decides to call themselves patron or queen or whatever now because they feel like it, and they feel, why can't you call yourself they? And I want to call myself patron or queen. So this is my pronoun and I want to be respected for that. Can you expect others to respect you for that and to use that, or it's really just ridiculous thing to do? So where is the line?
I feel like that's a tough one. I mean, I know my own personal reaction to that, which maybe would not be the most generous. I think that it will be interesting to see if we ever bump into a firm, like societally, if we bump into a firm kind of wall at which we say, I draw the line, I'm not going to call you patron. Like, oh, patron, da, 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 da. Like, I think that it's, I mean, reasonable and like not even reasonable. It's just, it is a given that we should, if someone tells us that I prefer this pronoun, we should use it. But linguistically speaking, patron is not a pronoun.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Queen.
Yeah.
But if someone came to you and said, "Oh, hi, hello, my pronoun is patron, and in the plural it's queen,"
I think I will just, if it's a business situation, I will just try to avoid any pronoun in general. I'll just like somehow try to use it just to, because
this is another strategy for speaking inclusively. If there isn't some kind of pronoun available to you that isn't gendered, you can always, at least in English, you can use, like the student or the teacher. You don't have to say he or she. But also, I mean, we have this handy little they, like they do X, they do Y.
Yeah. I think it's a universal help when you don't really know, or when you want to include everyone else, not just, every book, I remember in my childhood, even now what I'm talking about, every book is by default he. Always. And it just used to, and I used to be, I think I was about, I don't know, 8 or something. I came to my mom, was like, but I can't be a protagonist because the protagonist has to be he. Mom was like, oh, don't worry. But it really it really made me think, so I can't be the hero.
It's just institutionalized misogyny. You'll get used to it.
Yeah, exactly. I actually have a really good book that I finished I finished a couple of months ago, and I would really recommend to everyone to read. I'm not sure if it's probably mirrored on Zoom. Is it mirrored?
No, yeah, it looks the right way.
Okay, so it's Invisible Women. It's super good. Exposing data bias in world design for men. For anyone who is interested in anything to know about gender bias, it's like a must. It's very the funny thing about this book, it's quite biased itself. In my opinion, because it just shows one side, but it has really interesting data in studies and cases showing that the world is designed by default for men, and it's not them to blame, but them to be more aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I really if you want, I can lend it to you.
I would love that, actually.
Yeah, because not you, because I buy so many books now. I just want for people to also get them and use them and recycle and so on and so forth. Good. Last remarks. What would you wish to anyone who want to become more inclusive in their communication? What things they will need to do?
I mean, this is kind of just my recommendation for anybody at this phase of our societal grapple with inclusion, but it really, really pays to really take an inventory of yourself. All right, what are my identities? Because we know what we know, but it's really hard to identify what we don't know or what we don't think about. And the sooner we start to think about those things, if I see pictures of all women, I'm not really going to think, oh, wow, but I don't see any men here. If I look at pictures with all men, I will probably notice, oh, wow, I really feel left out of this. And it's the case that we can also, as we speak, we're not necessarily taking everyone's identities into account all the time, but just being very diligent about taking gender out of our language, our personal communication, if we can. I think emails are a great way to start. Notice how you're starting your emails. Do, hey guys, da 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 da. It could be as simple as saying, hey all, hey y'all, hey. We can be mindful that we're those words, chairman, mailman, and noticing when we use them and doing better the next time. And listening also to your colleagues, listen to a person when they tell you that was offensive, or that is uninclusive. Really listening and not going to immediately to being defensive, but to actually going, hey, cool, thank you for telling me. I'm sorry, I didn't know that. I think practicing apologizing is a good thing for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking up if somebody else that you observe is not speaking up for themselves.
Exactly.
When you observe something, speak up for them.
Yeah.
And straight away, not like, oh yes, I did hear that that was not very nice, but I just want to come to tell you that now. 2 hours later, it doesn't help.
When it doesn't do any good.
Yeah, exactly. It's yeah, wonderful. Lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, the audience, for the wonderful question, for engagement. And thank you so much, Taylor, for being here today. Really enjoyed that. And for all of you who are interested in receiving the slides, it's all going to be sent in a follow-up message in the next couple of days, as well as the recording. And the next week's topic going to be the gender equality in the workplace. So be there at 5 on Tuesday. And if you have any questions, if you have any requests, any feedback, please send it to us so we could, improve and make better. And yeah, have a nice evening and enjoy.